Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So you see me again. In fact, I'll be covering for Dr. Nasir on the Pakistan's experience as well, because he sends his regards because he couldn't actually participate last minute due to work being assigned to him in the last minute. But what I'll do is, I'll just open this first. This is about the, just now we were talking about the Washington Accord in general, right? Starting with the International Engineering Alliance, and then we went into the Washington Accord. Now we are talking about the Madinah Accord. So what's the difference really? Right, let's move on. But before proceeding with that, I think there was some confusion just now as to what these accords are all for. Remember, there are only two parts to it. One is the education, the other part is the professional, right? That means professional engineers, accreditation of professional engineers, accreditation of engineering programs. And under this, if you are, let's say, a signatory to Washington Accord, so let's say JA is the signatory to the Washington Accord, therefore, all the qualification that JEA accredits would be substantially equivalent to any of the signatory members of the Washington Accord. That means to say, Jordan's, let's say just now, programs, all the 8 programs, let's say all accredited, therefore, they are substantially equivalent to any of those 20 countries, be it Malaysia, United Kingdom, United States, and any of those signatories. And when it comes to the professional system, IPEA, just now, if the person is accredited as a professional engineer, his qualification is considered as substantially equivalent with any of the signatories of the IPEA. Means to say whether it's United States, Australia, and all those who are signatories to that. So that's basically what the accords or agreement does, right? So basically giving that substantial equivalence, and they're not going to examine you anymore whether your qualification is acceptable or not. They are all acceptable. And continuing with that, right? I'm going to talk about the federation a bit, and then moving on to the Madinah Accord and so on. But before going into that, I just would like to put up this about the career path, right? Generally, all of us engineers are providing engineering services. That's what we do, right? Being engineers, provide engineering services, whether it's consultancy or any other engineering services. And what's the main domain of engineering? If we ask ourselves, what do engineers do? I mean, we are producing engineers. I mean, the universities are producing engineers. But what do we want these engineers to do? Generally, if we look at the spectrum of engineering services, we would expect actually engineers to be creators and innovators. They are into pushing the frontiers of engineering. The design aspects and research are important to engineers. So you'll find that these graduates are supposed to be focusing on research and design, consultancy work, right? And on the other hand, there's another group of engineers, the practical-oriented engineers, right? And what do? They look at the building, that means construction, operation, and maintenance of it. And that's the career path that we see. And if we were to differentiate this, on this left-hand side, basically, what engineers are supposed to be doing. On the other side, what the engineering technologists are supposed to be doing. Now, what really happened is, some engineering technologists wants to do engineering job. Some, right? But majority coming from the engineering are also doing engineering technologies job, right? So this is the predicament that we are in. Well, whether we like it or not, probably 60 to 70% of us are actually working in the other area, which is the domain of engineering technologies, whether you agree or not, but this is the definition at the moment. Now, if we were to look at the engineering spectrum, engineers doing design and research, the technologies will be doing supervision and maintenance, right? And we find that engineers' involvement, majority of the time, majority of them should be doing this, whereas they could also, the majority of the technologies will be doing that. But nevertheless, both could be doing other jobs as well, similar to what the engineers, vice versa, the engineering technologies. But they are supposed to be major or minor, primary or secondary, right? So, which means to say, like in Malaysia, we allow both engineering technologies and engineers to practice engineering, but there are the primary areas where they are supposed to be dominant, and the secondary areas, they are supposed to be minoring in there. And of course, supporting them are the technicians, supporting both, right? Whether they are technologists or they are engineers. So our focus is more on the engineers at the moment, right? Although the IEA covers all aspects. So here, if you look at the spectrum again, the engineers doing research and design, the technologies, the supervision and maintenance. So how is the curriculum development going to be? Are they going to be the same? So this is where the education part of it may actually be different. For example, we should have strong engineering sciences and mathematics for those who are doing engineering. It's quite theoretical in nature, whereas the engineering technologies are more practical in nature, more applied in nature. They may not need those rigorous sciences, engineering sciences, but there are elements of rigorousness may happen, but not necessarily. So if you look at the breadth and depth of their curriculum, it could be demonstrated as such. There are still the breadth, right? That's the breadth and that's the depth. You have more depth in engineering as compared to the engineering technology. Now this is when accreditors do come and visit your place, right? They will be looking at this. Are you producing engineering technologies or are you producing engineers? Right? So this is something we had that situation in Malaysia when the formation of the technical universities in the 90s. They were meant to produce engineering technologies, but they wanted to be accredited under engineering. So we had to reject them. It's difficult, the government were not happy, but that was the decision. It has to be done. Now, the Federation has actually celebrated its 31st anniversary in 2019. And if you look at the council, these are the current council, the Federation council members. But what is the role of FEIC? It is meant for the Ummah. When it was built or established, it was meant to make sure that it's the, well, to create wealth and good well-being of the Ummah, making sure that we can move forward in this world. Leadership is another, and the role is facilitating and trying to engage. Right? That's what the Federation wants. So we would like to see mobility among Islamic countries. As we know that, I've shown you this one, that interaction, migration, relief, and so on are important. And it is happening in many of the Muslim world, right? So the professional qualification pathway that we talk about is supposed to be similar in nature, right? That means to say, what's in Malaysia should be the same or almost similar to what's in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, and so on. And that will facilitate movement, right? And as you know that the standards, or rather the criteria, is about the same, right? Now, so we have this international mutual recognition as professional engineers, which we call it as the Makkah Accord. And when it comes to the Washington Accord equivalent, we have the Madinah Accord. So this is the equivalence that we want. We do not want to have a substandard criteria. So which means you say, if you qualify to be in Washington, you should qualify to be in Madinah, or the other way around, right? Because that's the standard that we would like to maintain. But of course, we can always be better. And then I'll skip this one. Again, the word is inclusivity, which the Accord, Washington Accord doesn't allow, right? That means to say they are exclusive. It is only to one organization. We know that there could be several organizations that are involved in that. But under Washington Accord, you must be the primary institution or the only institution to be a signatory, right? There cannot be 2 or 3. If there are 2 or 3, for example, in the Philippines, they say, sorry, you cannot come in yet. Until you resolve your problem, be one single organization to enter, and it must be independent. And that's what it is. But it's different with the Madinah Accord. We bring in everybody in because we can work together. So our expectation is similar to what the Washington Accord requires. For example, it's still outcome-based accreditation system. We still focus on breadth and depth, complex problem. Our engineers or our students must be engaged in solving complex problem. The pedagogy, we are talking about moving away from teacher-centered learning to student-centered learning, right? And improvement, which is the CQI, continual quality improvement, is a must, right? Without that, in fact, you're not going to be accredited. That's what it is. So again, I've shown you this. It's all similar to what the Washington Accord requires, and all the knowledge profile has to be there, right? And similarly complex taxonomy and so on. So if you were to compare between the two, the only difference are at the top there. For example, exclusive to one independent body per jurisdiction, which the Madinah Accord never say that. And of course, the Washington Accord has their sister accords, which is the Sydney and Dublin, which we don't at the moment, right? I mean, there's still time to progress. But both are non-prescriptive, which means to say you can be top universities, you can be mediocre universities, you fulfill the requirements, and those requirements are not really prescriptive to say you must have 20% of this, 20% of that. No. You need to benchmark. And you need to show, you need to demonstrate attainment, right? So outcome focus and the 3 area, knowledge, skills, and effective component are important. So at the end of the day, we are talking about building a culture in education. And that's what accreditation is all about as well. So we would like to make sure that you start with knowledge, changing the behavior. Of course, it will change the attitude. And finally, it becomes a DNA in you that quality is always in place. But with that, the university management becomes an important aspect of everything, right? Without the management, everything will. Without the commitment from the management, everything would fall. So they need to establish a system. So in fact, in Malaysia, we say there are 4 things that you need to fulfill for you to be accredited. First and foremost is to make sure that you have your breadth and depth of the engineering curriculum demonstrated and attained. The breadth and depth of engineering, not engineering technology, not anything else. You may have a beautiful system of outcomes, it doesn't work. Secondly comes the implementation of the outcome base, right? It cannot be just input based, but it is an outcome based. And then the third one is you must have a system, right? Your system must be in place. And finally, where are your improvement? Internally driven improvement. That's what we would like to see before a program can be accredited. So in conclusion, the emphasis for us in the Madinah Accord is to generate values in what we actually do as well, which is, remember I did mention about soul, university without soul, program without soul. And that's what many of us are generating at the moment, even in other areas of discipline. Talk about top universities, maybe top economies, but you see what happens with the meltdown of the economy coming from top universities. So if you talk about values, it seems that the values are not there. And this is what we would like to inculcate as well, apart from maintaining the technical competencies at the universities, right? So generally it is similar to the Washington Accord. Shall I move on? Let me just cover Pakistan first, eh? Right? Okay. I'll be as quick as possible, but you can always stop me anytime. All right, I know you'll get bored with me talking in front here. This is what Pakistan experienced. They have been mentored by Malaysia and Singapore, right? And I had a personal interest in Pakistan at that time to mentor them, right? Because I feel that it is our duty to help our brother countries. Now, the ascension of Pakistan to Washington Accord, this is their experience, right? Yeah.
Mention one thing. We all would like to thank Mr. Migati because he's taken over Dr. Nasser Khan. Dr. Nasser Khan couldn't make it. And we were thinking to, not to mention this presentation, but thank you very much. He took the load and he said, okay, I will present it to you for the benefits of everybody. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. So that's basically the function of the Pakistan Engineering Council. They do accreditation, they do registration of engineers, CPDs, and they are also a think tank to their government, and they register contractors as well. So PEC is a statutory body. It's an independent body, and all its finance is actually generated from registration. So the government does not pay a single cent to PEC. So they generate their own income, therefore they are independent financially and independent to make decisions. And that's the reason why they are able to get into Washington Accord despite the requirements. Remember I showed you the NGO things, right? To be an independent body, you are supposed to be an NGO, but they are a statutory body. But in actual fact, in the Washington Accord and other accords, they realize that what they need is not just NGOs, but they want NGOs who can influence the decision, right? For example, if they are being given the Washington Accord signatory status, they should be able to influence the body that is going to register the professional engineers. And the body that registers professional engineers in Pakistan is PEC, the statutory body. And they also accredit, so therefore they can influence because it is under one organization. So the chronology, the roadmap that they actually did started way back in 2009, of which by 2017 they became a full signatory member. So how long was that? It's almost, what, 8 years? Right? It's about 8 years. But mind you, Pakistan is unique. It was plagued with security issues. Not many people are willing to actually go to Pakistan, even right now. Right? But Professor Abang and myself, we were invited. So we were contemplating, should we go or not? But we felt that they need our help, so we went, even though the travel advisory was saying, don't go, right? And we influenced our colleagues in Singapore, because Singapore is just at the tip of Malaysia. We have a colleague there say, please come and join us. It's safe. Well, if you keep to the travel advisory, which say don't be in the military installation, don't be in the public places, and don't be in the northern frontier, you will be safe. But what happened to us, they sent to all the 3 places. And we were still safe, alhamdulillah. All right, that's a little story that we had with Pakistan. But you see, it takes a lot of time, mainly because the institution was not moving as quick, right? Because the decision-making machinery was so slow, right? They knew what they need to do, but they took a long time to make decisions. And only in 2013, after, imagine 2009, they started and got nominated in 2010, but only 2013, they launched their outcome-based accreditation manual. They need to show that they can demonstrate that, right? Which, after 2 years, they managed to show all those things, and the accreditors came. But of course, they were still worried. The reviewer came, they were still worried. In fact, the Pakistan government gave the assurance, even if you need a helicopter, we will send one to you for security purposes. And in fact, they went on a helicopter to the northern frontier, these reviewers. But the challenges is basically within the organization. Who are the champions? Who are the team members who are committed? And they managed to actually develop that, and that's how they managed to progress. So it is a full-time person running. Dr. Nasser is a full-time person managing accreditation, and of course he had a team of professors from notable universities in Pakistan who actually contributed. And at a call, anytime, they would actually come. And this team actually gel, and they are now vice chancellors and in all those positions at Pakistan University at the moment. And the other thing is training. So training of evaluators. We know that coming from the region, sometimes we are a bit, one would say interrogative and so on, which we have to change the style if you want it to be of substantial standard, right? The aplomb and decorum has to change. Which means to say there must be a different decorum which is substantially equivalent, right? So that's what they did, training, making sure that the panels were knowledgeable and looking at the forests rather than the trees and all those things, right? Although there was some reluctance amongst the universities, they were actually trying to manage that with more and more of the awareness program within the HEIs. So all this training, after training, and finally it was understood that Pakistan is not moving away from it. The universities understand there's no way that PEC is going to turn back and they start moving, mainly because the interaction between the two were very strong. The HEI, Higher Commission, Education Commission in Pakistan also committed to get that accreditation. And they gave even financial support to some of the activities that the university wanted to do. So these are things that I think cooperation is important here. Sometimes everybody says, this is my area, that's your area. But in actual fact, you need to cooperate to get things done in a much faster way and in a better way, right? Whether you are from the Ministry of Education or you are from the professional institution. There was an increase in workload, of course, reluctancy and all those things come into the picture, but nevertheless they slog. One of the things that they noticed about the mentoring process, despite the mentoring was there, but there were different terminologies being used. But of course, we never demand that you must follow 100% of what we are doing. But for us to make a recommendation, we should see that they are substantially equivalent or substantially equivalent to the other countries in terms of what their processes are all about. So that sort of, just to make sure that choose the right mentor. That's what they're trying to say. Choose the right mentor, because the experience of Bangladesh was very bad. They were rejected after 4 years being mentored, right? Imagine you're being mentored 4 years and they were rejected. and they were about to be thrown out from provisional membership. Finally, the agreement was, let's start all over again the clock, and they appointed the new mentor for Bangladesh. So mentoring is an important aspect, and it will enhance or facilitate or shorten your journey really with the mentoring. So a few suggestions or recommendation. Here, you must make sure you document most of the things that you do, generally because you need them during the review process, right? And the other thing is that you must have a training system in place. I think ABET has got a good training system in place. So Pakistan developed their own as well. Not that they didn't have it, but they have to be having something substantially equivalent to what is being practiced by the other signatories. And to shift is not easy, but you need to get the buying in. That's what it is, right? So the series of workshops were meant for the buying in. And finally, they actually conducted mock visits. You see, sometimes when you use internal experts, universities seems to be taking it easy. But when you bring someone from outside, they are more serious. I mean, that's probably human nature, I do not know, but that's it. They felt that that was the way, and they tried to get involvement of the international panels coming in. So with that, thank you very much. From Dr. Nasser, he had actually prepared this just to share with you in terms of the journey that he took, about 8 years. Okay, the last one. So bear with me. All right, lunch is just around the corner. I know lunch is more important. Okay, I've added a bit to this particular PowerPoint, just not on requirements alone, but preparation towards full signatory status, so that you can actually plan your way if you do want to get into Washington Accord, right? So these are the Washington Accord requirements, right? Who can be signatories? Any authorities, agency, and so on, provided they are not delivering academic program. So universities cannot do that. Ministry of Education, no, because they are responsible to deliver those education programs, right? So they are out. So it has got to be independent. That's the first one. Second, it says representative of the engineering profession that has legal or recognized authority. That means they are being given the authority to actually do the accreditation. But they are independent engineering professions. Okay. Representative of the engineering profession has the statutory power. So they've added this. Before it doesn't have it. So the statutory power. So that's why PEC can get into it. Or authority to accredit the programs. So by the act, they are the one to accredit programs. I think in Malaysia we have somewhat similar. It happens by chance, I suppose. The PEC and our Board of Engineers, we do have the same power in terms of we accredit programs, and for them to be registered as a graduate engineer, they must come from an accredited program. Otherwise, they cannot be registered. And in Malaysia, the ministry makes it compulsory for all programs to be accredited, otherwise they will close down the program. So in a sense, it's a complementary kind of function, right? We do not want any XYZ quality programs still being delivered even though they do not meet the requirements. And on application, a mentoring service is being provided. You can have a mentor if you want, or you can go yourself. It's up to you. But you need to call basically 2 nominators. The countries that is going to nominate you to be a provisional member. So it can be from any of those full signatories, not outside the full signatory members. It must be from the 20, right? You can pick anyone without mentoring or with mentoring, right? That's your choice. If you think that you are ready, call these nominators to come and they will review, and they will put a recommendation whether to recommend you for provisional status or not. And that information will then to be submitted to the IEA headquarters in New Zealand 6 months before the annual meeting, which is normally conducted in June of each year, right? So according to the website, it says unanimous decision. But according to the rules and procedures, it only requires a simple majority, right? So it's easy to get into provisional. But to get a full signatory status after that, you require unanimous decision, right? Which means all the 20 countries must agree. Anyone says no, you are out of it. So that's the sort of seriousness in terms of application to the Washington Accord, or any other courts for that matter, or even agreements. The agreements allow 95% majority, 5% can dissent, right? You still get into it, but not the Washington Accord. Washington Accord is the only accord that says 100% must agree, right? So how can you convince them? That's the important bit, right? So convincing them means you should allow others to assess you. The nominators had already assessed you. Don't get the same reviewers assessing you again, because the reviewers will come from a different countries after the nominators. So you might have 3 reviewers, 2 nominators. There are already what? Five countries having access to knowing the situation in your organization, the programs in the country, right? So that's important. And the more signatories understand you, the better it is. For example, I think, Jordan, you're being accredited by ABET, right? That's a plus point. There's an experience there. Because Turkey had that experience before, right? So the degree of confidence may be there, right? But the more countries that are actually being, you're exposing yourself to, the better it is, right? So that's the rule, basically. And provisional membership is only for 2 to 4 years. After the 4th year, if you are still provisional, you'll be out of that league. Start all over again, basically, right? That's the new rule that they had just introduced 2 years ago. And the full signatory status, what is going to happen is that the reviewer would actually send a report to the headquarters. Usually this reviewer will be appointed by the executive committee. Remember the 2 persons that I showed you? They are part of the board of governors, but they are the executive or the council for the Washington Accord. Taipei and Australia, they will actually vet first the universities that you propose to be visited. What they want is, they do not want the top echelon university. They want to see basically the threshold universities. Because if the threshold universities are good, they would expect others will be equally good or much better, right? Because that's what they wanted to see. So if you give the low or the high rank, all those high rank universities, right, they will reject. That's the current situation now, right? Although many countries in the past were pushing all their best universities to be reviewed. So now they expect the threshold universities to be reviewed. And once they agreed, right, they will appoint 3 reviewers from 3 different countries to go and review your programs. And you must be, they will be looking at big universities, small universities, private universities, so that they get a good picture of what it is, how you practice them, consistency in your decision making. And then they will send a report back whether to recommend or not to recommend. If it is not to recommend, there will be a discussion, and usually you will not get into Washington Accord if the recommendation is negative. If it is a positive recommendation, chances is you're going to get 90% into it. There will be some discussion usually, right? And that's how I've seen in the past, for the past 12 years that I've been participating with the IEA meeting, that's what they have been doing. All right. So this is Pakistan's experience. We had nominators in 2010. Finally, the reviewer came in 2017. And they got the signatory status in 2017. And this is Malaysian situation. So we had so many mentors coming from Australia, United States, and Hong Kong. And we even invited international panels just to make sure that everybody is familiar with ours. And a number of universities, new universities, old universities, large universities, small universities, private and public, they viewed everything. And they cannot say anything else after having viewed that to say the standards do not meet the requirements, right? So that's what we had the situation, because we wanted in Malaysia, not just the top 5%, top 10%. We want everybody to be considered as meeting that minimum. And they even suggested to us, why don't you have a fast train and a slow train? We said, no. We want all the train to move together, right? So the fast has to wait for the slow. So that's what it is. So it took us a longer time, but that was our intention. We wanted it that way. Everybody to get on board, and we got it, right? And of course, we've gone for a second round being reviewed. Monash University in Malaysia is a private university, so it is also being reviewed. And okay, so these are the people that I've shown you just now. But one thing you must have is your standard. What is your standard? Do you have an accreditation standard? Without this, you cannot move, even though you may have an organization, right? These are typical areas that they would expect you to have or covered, but what most important is improvement, right? All internally driven. And they are concerned about the complex problem, right? They will concerned about complex problem. They will be concerned about open-ended problems, right? Your laboratory, where are your open-ended laboratories? Right? So a system must be in place. For example, there should be an outcome-based system covering all aspects. I'm not going to explain. I'm showing you a system, a complete system with evaluation eventually, right? Having continual improvement. So you have a directed and coherent curriculum where the graduates will be relevant to the industry because you get feedbacks from the industry or coming in, and at the same time, it's accountability, right? So everybody is accountable. That's the system that should have been in place. And knowledge profile should be in place as well, right? And of course, all the graduates outcome, the 12, you may have different wordings. In those days, they say you are lazy if you adopt this. But now many of the PEVs prefer this, right? The evaluators. But remember, you see, there are a lot of places it says complex engineering problems. So which means the program must deliver complex engineering problems. Otherwise, it will not fulfill the requirements of Washington Accord, right? Okay, I'll just keep all this. I've shown you some. And this is trying to differentiate. So we have this diagram that differentiates between what engineering and what engineering technology is all about. So we are very clear in Malaysia. So no one can say that we are blurred about it, right? Because we've done this study in 2003, actually. So the volume of knowledge that we would expect, even though ours is a 4-year program as far as engineering technology is concerned. Eh? So attainment is something that you must be able to demonstrate. But how you put in your knowledge, skills, and effective components depends on you. Early years, later years, more in the early years, or less in the later years, it's up to you. And some of the models, like in the UK, they tend to look at the last 2 years to be the one that is decisive in making decisions, right? But one of the things that I'm just trying to finish this off, our experience with Sydney and Dublin, which you could actually leverage on, right? Because the process is similar. It's just that it is Sydney and Dublin. We try to show our history. You have a history. But as far as Dublin and Sydney, we didn't have much history. So we leverage on the Malaysian Qualification Agency's history, because they did accreditation of all those programs because we were not doing them at that time yet, right? So we took them in and we say that now we have our own. And in fact, those graduates that came out previously were given saving rights. They can be registered as engineering technologists with the Board of Engineers, although the programs are not accredited, but just to, as a saving rights. You need to develop a roadmap, right? So we had a roadmap, and we know where are the bottlenecks and so on, right? So you can do your network analysis there. So we have planning and implementation over a period of 2 years, right? So that is the provisional signatory, and this is our target to get full signatory in 1.5 years. And we did that, actually, based on our experience with Washington Accord. That took a longer time, right? But it's easier with this one because we had the experience. And our nominators coming from Korea and Engineers Australia. So we did the application for provisional in Alaska 2017, and in June 2017 we applied. Immediately we got in Alaska, we applied on the spot, right, for next year. And that's why we got into the review team to come in 2017 in such a way that we gained our signatory status within a year. And the universities at threshold I did mention just now, you may have the quadrant, right, the 4 quartiles, and they would expect you to provide universities about that region. Then they have more confidence in what they are seeing, right? So those are the things. And in our case, we invited them to the city as well as somewhere in the north, right? So not necessarily only at one particular place. So they get to see most of it. This is a typical itinerary of review visit. And we also mentioned about our organization that we do have an accrediting one-stop center. Remember I mentioned to you, one-stop center where all the public service department, MQA, the Board of Engineers, the learned bodies are actually part and parcel of that. So because everybody is doing accreditation, and the complaint now is, well, we have less accreditation because everybody comes at the same time, because it's one body only, right? And these are run by volunteers, and they do have a salaried person and so on. So that gives confidence in terms of an organization, whether they are sustainable or not in terms of giving accreditation. So these are our statutory role. That's what the Act allows us to actually register, and they can only register engineers who comes from an accredited degree. So this is the Malaysian Engineering Accreditation Council with our motto, excellence in engineering education, a culturalization of quality and competence in evaluation, right? And that's our council, with 50% from the industry, 50% from the academia, right? And that's the department that actually runs by some of part-timers, some are full-timers. The part-timers coming from the universities, we engage about 8 universities professors to spend part of their time there to make sure that the standards can be maintained, right? Okay, this is the visiting team. When you have many visiting team, you normally have the head of the delegation. And the head of delegation is the one that is going to harmonize all the decision. So imagine, if you don't have enough evaluators, you're going to have the same evaluators going over and over again. So training becomes important. So this is something that you have to plan for. If you know, for example, we've calculated how many programs and how many universities. This is for Sydney and Dublin, right? So finally we thought 400 would be the figure that we must achieve, right? So 11 institutions for the degree program and 116 the technology program, right? And we also chart out when they are going for accreditation so that we can actually plan the training of panels and so on. Not only that, For example, by 2018, there will be influx of all the application, right? And you have to start documenting all this, your policies, your management systems, right? Training programs for evaluators, and then self-assessment report to make sure that we can actually apply to submit, right? This is the self-assessment to submit our application for Sydney or the Dublin. So for you, it's going to be Washington Accord or Madinah Accord, right? And the self-assessment report has to cover all this. So we even train the universities to make them understand our criteria. But one thing is that your panel must be able to triangulate, right? Because there are many criteria. They must be good at looking at the forest rather than the trees, right? You may get people who even look at the leaves and making decision on that. So the focus of EAC has always been these 4 areas. So if you miss them, you may not be accredited. But the worst thing is that if you miss the breadth and depth, there is no return to that, right? So consistency of decision, we make sure that there must be consistency because there are different panels going, right? And so we have consistency committee, we do the pre-ADM, pre-decision meeting. Finally, the directors will streamline everything to be tabled at the council. So this is something that came later. It wasn't in the early years, but we felt that there were, the panels were coming with different decisions. So we wanted some consistency. So training is an essential element. Train the institution, train the panel evaluators. So they are on the same wavelength. That's very important, right? So WA is really a long, arduous journey, really. It's a journey and there's no end to it, really. Even though when you get Washington Accord, there will be another review process every 6 years, right? And sometimes if you're alone, well, you know what's going to happen, right? So you need a team, really. Okay? And it's a very lonely one. So I'll just stop here. The key factors in preparation is basically you must have an accrediting body, right? It's independent. Accrediting body. There must be management commitment at the university. And of course, management commitment at the institution as well that is conducting accreditation, right? There must be a full-time champion and committed, knowledgeable team. Committed, knowledgeable team, right? Panel evaluators training as well as their commitment. So can you get the commitment of the panel evaluators? And the institution of higher learning must be a party to it. They cannot see as having, one side the university, the other side is the accreditors. And they are always animosity to each other sometimes, right? But we cannot have that situation if we really want to progress. And finally, it's the financial commitment. But to tell you the truth, we only spend about $200,000 US to get Washington Accord. Because we had to fly in the reviewers, business class, and all those. That was where our money went to. But internally, we managed to sustain, because now sustaining is only, for example, we pay only about 10,000 ringgit, which is about 2,500 US dollar per year as a subscription fee to Washington Accord. But what it does is, you are building your own internal capacity. Remember, Washington Accord is all about accreditation within one's own jurisdiction. So you develop your own capacity by doing that yourself, right? Of course, you can always invite others to come in, but when you invite, even though they are from the signatories, the mutual agreement says they cannot be considered because they are accrediting beyond their boundaries, right? So which means if Malaysia were to come and accredit Jordan, right, we are accrediting beyond our boundary. And none of the signatories will actually accept that as substantially equivalent, even though Malaysia say it's equivalent, because we are going more than what we should be doing. So that is the agreement under the Washington Accord. So Hong Kong recently was trying to get universities that they accredited in Macau. But there is already CAS in China. CAS should have accredited the programs in Macau. And why they didn't do that? And suddenly Hong Kong went to Macau, although they are all from the same country, right? With independent jurisdiction. But until now, none of the signatories accept them. But that doesn't mean that they cannot do that, right? It's just that the understanding is we will not recognize those outside the boundary jurisdiction. That's the agreement under the Washington Accord. I think in conclusion, mentoring is optional. Nomination is required for provisional status. Mentoring is obligatory when you are going for full signatory. Normally there will be 2 to 3 jurisdictions being appointed. And review will be conducted for full signatory status. Accreditation body must be ready all the time because the reviewer can come at any time, right? And institution of higher learning must also be ready to cooperate, right? Because on that day, if you don't cooperate, then everything will fall down. When I say cooperate, it's not for you to role play. That means to say you are ready implementing what is expected of by that standards, right? So with that, thank you very much. I'm sorry to take so long to cover till the end. Assalamu alaikum.